This segment of the show is Cheers to That with our friends at Yeti.
I found a horse, and it was one that had been to the NFR, and I've tried to recall who it was that owned the horse, and he wanted, this may sound strange, but in 1971, this was a horse that had been to the NFR that I think was going for $3,500.
Rodeo time. Welcome to the Luke Branquinho Show. My next guest, I was reading up, doing some little homework, which I rarely do. Somebody dubbed him as what'd they call you? The John Wayne with a law degree. Bud Homman, thank you for joining me. And for all those folks out here that are new to the show or wondering, what this is about, well, this is what I enjoy talking to guys like Bud. Bud, thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. That you have done some research, I see.
Well, it was funny. So just for everybody out there, Bud is retired now, was, I believe, a Fifth Circuit Court judge, correct?
That is correct.
But started at a late age, like 37. What a lot of people don't realize is you rodeoed, and from a ranching family in Florida, and then next thing you know, you're a circuit judge.
Yeah, well, my family, as I had told you one time before, they actually came here in the 1830s and got in the cattle business in Florida. So I grew up, my mother's family, around that, and rodeo influences along that time. And then as I grew up, I went into, working on various cattle ranches, including my own at one point, and started rodeoing here in Florida, which was much different than it is today. I grew up in a Florida where the highways were still rock roads. In town were dirt roads. So it greatly changed in Florida during my lifetime.
Well, it was interesting. It was about a week and a half ago when I called you, and what prompted the call was my boys and I were driving to school in early morning, like 5. We have to leave the house by 5:45 or 6. But anyway, one of the boys is like, "Hey, Dad, did you know that the Native Americans in Florida did not get relocated by the U.S. military because they went down the Everglades and the Army's like, hey, we ain't going any farther." And I was like, yeah, I know a gentleman, a friend that lives down there. His family, was really some of the first down there in the ranching community. And that prompted me, like, man, this is a great story to have Bud come on here and tell it. And for my boys to be talking about it, and then me be able to say, hey, I know somebody that could really educate not just them, but heck, the world on Florida, it was pretty cool for me to be able to say, I know a guy.
Yeah. When I was talking about when I was growing up, and I started riding when I was probably 5 or 6 years old, but my cousin would come by to my grandmother's and early in the morning, and we would take off in a town called Immokalee, which is Seminole for my home was the name of the town. And we would ride, and at that time, of course, the Seminole Indians had drifted down into the Big Cypress Swamp, and then Immokalee is on the border of the Big Cypress Swamp. And actually, my great-grandfather was the third non-Indian family to come to that area. So we would actually ride our horses, and at that time, the Seminoles still lived in the what were called chickies or chickies, whichever way you pronounce it. But we would actually ride. My cousin and I, we would ride because everything was open. And people have to realize, in Florida, there was no fencing of cattle land or any land until after 1953. And see, being 70 years old, I don't remember what happened in 1953, but certainly shortly thereafter, there was still fencing happening. So we would ride and ride, and we would ride to the places where they lived right there in Immokalee, and those what I'm talking about is thatch huts. That's with palmetto cabbage palm leaves is what they were thatched with. So we would ride through there, and of course my family was being down there so early. We would also go down to the Big Cypress, and my great aunts and great uncles, they would visit, and they were all kind of friends during that period of time.
Well, to me, that's just such a cool story that you getting to, grow up with the natives and kind of learn their culture. And, and I'm assuming a lot of trading went on back and forth back then with you amongst the kids.
Well, prior to that, there was a family, the Browns, that actually they went out into the Everglades and had a store there that traded primarily with the Seminole Indians, but also my great grandfather opened the store in Immokalee in the town, and of course, it was predominantly the Indians that lived there then, and so certainly that was who came to the store mostly.
Across the created desert to where the mountains touch the sky. This is Sanderson Ford Country, where Arizona's pride. Sanderson Ford Country, built on serving you. Sanderson Ford, satisfaction in Colorado stand, where Arizona's pride. Sanderson Ford.
Right. And so as a young boy growing up on the ranch, and I want to get, we're going to come way back to this in detail, but growing up rodeoing as a young man, but kind of retired when you're around 37 years old and decided to go into law.
Well, my father was an attorney, and we had the ranch. I'll tell this story fairly quick, how that he always pushed for me to be a lawyer. And when I first went off to college, I was telling that I really wanted to rodeo. And at the time, I had not started steer wrestling, and I thought I was going to be a calf roper because we'd roped on the ranch.
Right.
Rope. And so I told him, I said, I found a horse, and it was one that had been to the NFR, and I've tried to recall who it was that owned the horse, and he wanted, this may sound strange, but in 1971, this was a horse that had been to the NFR that I think was going for $3,500. So I was trying to talk my dad into buying that horse so I could go rodeoing rather than college, and he said, when you graduate law school, you find a horse just like that and I'll buy it for you. Well, I never wanted to go to law school, so that rocked on, and I finally left college to rodeo and work on cattle ranches and like that. And then we worked on my dad's ranch. I'll get to it fairly quick, but he brought me in one day and he said, we've got a bill to pay. It's $50,000, and I want can you gather our cattle and cut out what will be the equivalent of $50,000 worth of steer calves, not one heifer calf, but steer calves. And I said I could do that. So I went and did that. And they went off to the market. And I already knew when he called me, he said he wanted to meet with me again, that actually the check would be $50,135. So I hit it pretty good. And so I went in, the check was laying there on his desk, and I thought he was going to give me the good guy award. And he said, I've made a decision. I said, what is that? He said, you're going to law school. And I said, well, I'm not going to law school. He said, why aren't you going to law school? I said, because I'm a cowboy. And he said, where are you a cowboy at? And I said, well, right here on this ranch. He said, not anymore. You're fired. I always get to law school. So I headed out, and unfortunately, he passed away right after. So I was in that dilemma for a number of years, and I finally decided, you know what? I think I'm going to go to law school. Well, that year, I qualified for what's known as the IFR, for the International Professional.
Right.
And when I left there, a lot of people were pushing me to to make a run to try to go to the NFR. So I decided, well, I'm going to apply to one law school, and if I get in, I told my wife, if I get in, I'm going to become an attorney. If not, we're moving to Oklahoma, and I'm going to try to make the NFR. So I applied to and here's another funny part about it. You have to take a law school admissions test to get in. And I was at what was the IPRA's equivalent of the National All Regional Finals, like the National Circuit Finals.
Right.
And I was in Salina, Kansas, and the exam, the law school admissions test, was on the Monday. And I left there Monday morning, actually, from the Dallas-Fort Worth. I qualified down to Dallas-Fort Worth, left out of there, got home Monday morning, flew in Monday morning, and my wife picked me up to the airport and drove straight. I never studied for the law school admissions test because I did not want to score high enough to go to law school.
Right.
So anyhow, I got my score back, sent out my application, and it had been a while, and I hadn't heard anything. So I was getting ready to go to Oklahoma when I went down to the mailbox, and they said, "Going to get accepted, you get a thick package." And I looked in there, and I told my brother was with me, and I said, "I think I'm headed to Oklahoma." And I reached in and grabbed that package, and I said, "Well, we can nix Oklahoma, where I'm headed." I ended up in law school.
And that was, I got that wrote down, the Nova South University Law Center. Where is that? Where was that located at?
Well, that's interestingly enough, that's in Davie, Florida, which is a big rodeo town.
Yep.
It always has been. So that's why I applied there. Because and our ranch was only 60 miles from Davie, where it was in Big Cypress we bordered the Indian reservation down there. It had both advantages, but I was able to, I still had a bulldogging horse. I kept him. And actually, all 3 years I was in law school, I qualified for the Southeastern Circuit Finals in the PRCA. So that was back then. We had, I remember one year when I got the letter, it said I had competed at 45 rodeos, and those 45 rodeos were all in South Florida.
Oh, wow.
So, PRCA rodeos. So that's another change that has happened.
Yeah.
Across the created desert to where the mountains touch the sky. This is Sanderson Ford Country, where Arizona's pride.
Sanderson Ford Country,
Built on serving you. Sanderson Ford.
Satisfaction in todo para usted.
Where Arizona's pride. Sanderson Ford.
You know, you're saying how that Florida, you went to 40 some rodeos just in South Florida there, and California used to be the same way. We used to have over 100 plus circuit rodeos, and just times have changed, and I hate to say it, but things have changed enough where it's kind of getting moved out. And similar in Florida.
Yeah, well, and I'll go back a little bit in history. When I started steer wrestling, there wasn't much. It was the RCA then,
right?
I think they only had 2 rodeos in Florida, but the IRA FCA was the Florida Cowboy Association was a combined association, and they had quite a few rodeos in Florida. But we had what we called open rodeos.
Mm-hmm.
For a young guy starting out, there was a rodeo every Friday night in a town called Lake Placid, right off Highway 27. There was a rodeo every Saturday night in River Ranch, which is a resort area that had rodeo every Saturday night, full rodeo. And then there was a guy that put on a jackpot steer wrestling, bull riding, and barrel race on Sunday every week. So, for a guy starting out there, you could nod your head 3 times every week in Florida at the steer wrestle. So it was that greatly changed. And then the open rodeos then started turning into because there was a stock contract with them,
right.
Rodeos, but they were not sanctioned by anybody. And then, of course, the IRA rodeo. pretty prominent. So, but there was a lot of rodeos to go to, and as they sort of filtered over, so people don't realize even back there was a lot of rodeos in Florida, and then of course they changed into PRCA rodeo, and and it, but now it's declined, and there's no reason for it. I mean, I think that the people would like to see them, but I just I guess with the cost of everything, they don't put them on like they do.
Yeah, and I mean, I could see that, the cost of stock, travel costs to haul stock to somewhere. I mean, as well as anybody how expensive that can be. But one thing that I thought was very interesting with you and hearing your story, and when we were down at your place, was that 2021, I think, when we went down there and laid up at your place. Just to listen to your stories and growing up down there, but how you went from retiring, coming back at, what were you, 50 when you came back to?
55.
55 years old, came back and won the Southeast Circuit. It was at the average, or was that the year end? Did you win that?
That was the average at the finals.
Some folks don't know, that qualified you to the Dodge National Circuit Finals, which is now the Ram Finals, which is such a prestigious event for a circuit cowboy, especially, a guy that doesn't get to go rodeo full time and go rodeo hard. You got a chance to go to the Ram Finals and compete against some of the biggest names and have a chance at some pretty cool stuff. And that's 55. How old were you? That was 2009 that you won the.
When I won the circuit finals, I was actually 56 at that time. I turned 56 during the year.
That's so incredible. I can remember, this is no joke. I can remember because I won the world in 2008. So 2009, obviously kind of rolling through a high off of 2008. And then I read the story in the PSN of you, and I didn't know you at the time, and read the story. I'm like, holy crap, this is impressive. And I thought that was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen as a guy like you come back and unretire, and come and kick the crap out of the young kids at the circuit there.
Yeah, I, as I say, I still went and rodeoed in the circuit, PRCA Southeastern Circuit, while I went to law school. And when I got out, I was 37 at that time. And everybody I talked to told me, don't rodeo past 40. Just don't do it. Can't steer wrestle past 40. Several people said, you get about 37, 38, you might want to check out and quit doing it. And that was guys that really rodeoed a lot for telling me that. So when I got out of law school and started working as an attorney, I said, okay, I'm going to quit. So I quit right after the 1991 circuit finals, and I wasn't going to run any more steers. And then I got a job in Brooksville, Florida, which is not far from Dade City, Florida. A good friend of mine lived there by the name of Bob Barthel, and so I'm working there as an attorney in Brooksville, and completely done rodeo, and I wasn't going to do it. And then he convinced me to go with him one year. So I again made the circuit final in 1994, and right after that, I told Bob, I said, I really am done now. And so I was completely done with it and never going to do it again. And I would get kidded. People would say, when you're sitting in court waiting for a hearing to come as an attorney, they said, why do you do your fist like this? And is that something that you get pumped up with? And I laughed because I said, well, actually, I'm bored sitting there waiting for my case to be called. So I'm thinking about the old days when, did that. And they said, well, that must have been a really big deal to you. But I rocked on and finally got appointed as a judge and started that work. And what happened was I was living a good life, and I went in for a checkup, and the doctor said, they said, we're going to get your weight. And they said, what do you weigh? I said, 240, 250, somewhere in there. And they started with that. It wasn't what it was. And it rocked on until finally it was 320 pounds. So
wow.
The doctor told me, he said, you're not going to live very long. And I was 54 at the time. And with this weight, and he was suggesting things I could do. I said, well, if I lose 80 pounds can I, will that take away all the, and he laughed and he said, like that happened. So I set out to do that. And I was running every day and not eating, starving to death. And a guy named Lee Padone that lived in the area came by while I was jogging one day. And you might know that name because Ryan Padone made the
Right.
daughter.
Across the Great Desert to where the mountains touch the sky. This is Sanderson Ford Country, where Arizona's pride.
Sanderson Ford Country,
Built on serving you. Sanderson Ford.
Satisfaction en todo para usted.
We're Arizona's pride. Sanderson Ford.
Here on the Luke Branquinho Show, we like to throw a little rodeo trivia around. Where is the Pro Rodeo Hall of Fame and Museum of the American Cowboy located? To hear the answer, you're going to have to stay tuned, keep watching the show, because I will answer it a little bit later.
So Lee drives by me and he starts laughing. He goes, what do you think you're going to do? Start back steer wrestling? And as he went on laughing and I was laughing, I stopped and I said, yeah, maybe I'll just do that. And I get shortly thereafter, strangely enough, I get a call from a friend of mine. He's putting on a bulldogging school, and it's in August in Florida. So you can imagine how hot it is. He says, these boys aren't wanting to do anything. He said, would you come out here and maybe give them a rah-rah speech to get them going? I said, I don't think they want to hear from me, but I'll come on out there. So I came out there, and they were taking steers out of the chute at the time. And these were some big, I can see why they didn't want to do it, because they were some big steers. So this one kid takes one out and he gets up under him. The steer's kind of standing over him, just mauling him. And I ran up there to try to help him get back up, and he let go of the steer. And the steer took off, and I don't know why. I dropped my arm over his back, and down the arena we went, and I slid him around, and he hit in the middle of his back. Someone you probably know, Spunk Sasser, was
Oh, yeah.
Well, you know what? You need to get your card back and come rodeoing with me. I got a good horse right now. And I said, you know what? I might do that. And so I went on through some more steers there and called and got my card back. And that's how the story went.
Well,
And, Spunk, he stayed after me after that and would, make me run way more steers than I wanted to run. And finally, I was able to bulldog good enough to get to the circuit finals and win that.
Well, like I said, I got reading the story in the PSN, and I'm not sure that was 2009, so it was an actual magazine. Remember, it used to be it was an old paper, like it was an old newspaper type deal, but I can remember reading that through the magazine. I thought, man, that is so cool that a guy like that did rodeo, retired, went and found another profession, and then found your love again for the sport and was able to be successful. For me, I obviously rodeoed my whole life, turned 40-ish, 38, and started falling apart and just kind of let myself go. And now I'm down 50 pounds and I probably feel as good as I ever been, but I don't think I don't think I could do it. I don't think I could jump another steer. My head says I can, but my body, I think, would like a twig just snap in two. But it was such a fun story for me to hear, and then hear it from you personally. And that's stuff that I think the Western world, the fans need more of that, inspirational stuff like that you showed right there, Bud.
Well, and when you talk about not doing anymore, I still have steers here at my place, and I throw them on the ground. Nobody comes much, so I throw them on the ground by myself. Take them out of the chute, throw them down. Still, I do that every week. And then just 2 weeks ago, guys were coming up to run horseback, and my wife said, "You need to run a steer today when everybody's here." I'm 70 years old, and I told her, I said, I haven't done that in a while now. And she said, "No, you just need to run one." And It'll just be good for you. So I was out there. I was so nervous. I usually throw them on the ground. I was so nervous thinking about it, and those guys were throwing some steers on the ground and everything, and it got ready to run them. And I said, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to. I didn't throw any on the ground. I said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I said, it's a kind of a Charlet looking steer. He runs with his head way high. Runs on a little bit hard, but he runs with his head way high. I said, if he comes in first and loads in that chute, I'll run him, because he never does. He's always the last steer. So I thought it was safe thinking that. And I'm looking, and here comes that Charlotte steer. Lokes alleyway, Lokes all the way in and runs into the chute. And I looked at one of the guys that was warming up his hazing horse. I said, that hazing horse warmed up? He said, yeah, I think so. Why? Yeah. I said, we need to run this steer right now. He said, you? I said, yes, now, before I changed my mind. So I did. I run him, and I caught him and threw him down. And then I think, well, I'm ready to do it again. But and I'm not saying I've quit, but I'm just not entering.
Yeah, right. So what was and when we were down there in 21, you were entered up, I believe, right? So what was the last rodeo you entered?
Huh?
What was the last rodeo you entered?
I kept on after that, entering, just some of the better rodeos here in Florida. I wasn't trying to any particular goal other than to win a rodeo. And my horse last year, the last 2 years, the bulldog horse I rode, he came up crippled. So I quit both years, didn't enter anymore after he came up crippled. Last year, he came up crippled, and I had surgery done on him. But that's the horse I rode that he's healed up from that. But I decided to enter Kissimmee in the summertime, which is a prestigious rodeo here. And so I entered there, and I caught a steer, and I still don't know how it happened. I had him coming around, and my foot kind of stuck. My right leg, my knee went off like
geez,
rifle. And so I did not go to the doctor on it, and but I couldn't walk for like 3 weeks. And that's when my wife said, you don't need to enter anymore. And I said, well, I don't enter that much. But she said, you control the ground at your arena.
Exactly.
You don't control it at the rodeos. And that's what got you. And I said, yeah, but they had watered it down too much.
Mm-hmm.
They had watered down, but then it gets that sticky way to it. And then it up. And I sound like I'm complaining. I'm not. It's should have handled it better. I didn't see it coming on. And so I did enter last summer at Kissimmee, is where I hurt my knee.
I got you. But it felt good, that steer you jumped the other day?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's kind of funny. I told you he runs with his head up high. So, and he runs on. So you don't have to
take a start. Yeah.
He runs on. So, and by running on, I knew that would give me time to convince myself I was getting off while I was riding to him. So I'm riding to him, and I'm going, my mind actually clicked on. I said, you know what? You're not going to have any excuse if you ride by, because there's heads up in the air, the hazer's right beside him, and your horse is running right where he needs to be. So I got off, and from there it was just perfect. Run on enough that I was able to get my head catch on him. He didn't stop or nothing to prevent that, and got a good head catch on him. And he's not what I would call an easy to throw steer, but he's a good steer. So it all went. I felt really good.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the ground and you control it. My whole career, I was like a barrel racer in my practice pen. I wanted it. If I wanted it hard, I would make sure it was hard. If I wanted it, soft, I'd make sure it's soft. But there's so much truth to that, and I think it really helped my confidence going to other rodeos, knowing that I can make the ground how I wanted it, my place, and make my runs. But I didn't think you were complaining at all. There'd be times, even in the prime of my career, I'd look out in the arena and be like, I might ride by this one. Just, as well as anybody, your knees and your ankles and your legs are what make a living in the steer wrestling. So you weren't complaining. You and I were together on that.
Well, I see a lot that happens. You know, they whip the arena down for the dust control. I understand that, but the guy that comes in with the tractor, you know, uh, no need to show off on how good that John.
Hey, this is what I equate it to.
What you do.
They have one job, and they're the tractor guy. And their one job a year is to make sure that ground is perfect. And they're perfect and our perfect are two completely different things.
Right, and they don't make it perfect for. And I know bulldogging's the least of their concern in doing that, but and that's what happens from time to time. It gets a little too deep, and
Yeah.
you know, for a wrestler, deep ground is really rough.
It's definitely hard, especially, and you know, and especially nowadays, and in my opinion, is deeper ground and smaller cattle is a bad combination. Deeper ground and bigger cattle, at least you could kind of hold you up, and you could
They would pick you up out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, these little ones, when you catch them and you get your feet stuck, they'll anchor and come across your legs, and then yeah.
That's the thing. You can't get enough. If you don't, the big cattle always picked you up and took you through it.
Yep.
And the smaller cattle, like you say, they just come right off your hip and they're over your lap, and your legs are stuck.
Yeah. And we don't run big cattle anymore, Bud. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Oh, I know. That was a big surprise. I had put that on Facebook a while back, got a lot of comments on it, just talking about, I had a picture, and of, it's actually a skull that's painted of a steer, and it's a steer, and it's actually painted, it was at the Florida Indian Rodeo series. It was in Hollywood, Florida back then, and the steer was one of the Seminole Indians painted on that skull the picture of me catching that deer when I was 3.2 seconds on him.
Oh, cool.
I like to tell that story because when people look at it, I mean, his rack of horns is out here like that, and I'm not trying to sound like I'm a real old person, but I've actually run steers at a rodeo at the end of the year that when they went to the market right after that, they weighed 900 pounds.
Oh yeah.
So, that they were weighing in that 770 range, when you run them at the rodeo, and we didn't think anything of it. I mean, that
Right.
was just, that was the kind of cattle run. And when they came the first of the year from Mexico, they came to Florida. Of course, they lost a lot, but they would have the frame
Right.
to weigh 600.
Yep.
They might only weigh 480, but they were big steers.
Yeah, their feet were that big around. Their tails drug the ground.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I'm going to go ahead and say it, and Coleman Proctor's going to get so mad at me, but I don't care. I blame team ropers because they have all these damn jackpots now. They got to get those cattle from Mexico really young, so we get stuck with the young ones too. I mean, realistically, like we're talking, those steers used to be 6 years old before they'd come across the border. Right. Now they're 2 years old, 2.5 years old, so they're not as mature. They don't grow up as much, and I mean, it's just the way it is now. But yeah, I mean, they were 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and I could remember my folks would always get 2 loads of steers in when I was younger and put on team ropings. But there weren't a lot of team ropings, so you'd still get those good, framey, older type cattle, and we'd sort those off, and that's what we'd bulldog when I was in high school. But yeah, it's completely changed, completely different, and and I can't knock a stock contractor. That's what they have to go and get to put on the rodeos. And everybody's like, well, why don't they buy them, hold them off for a year, put them on feed and let them grow? I'm like, okay, so you spend, let's just say $150,000 on a load of steers. That's $150,000. I'm doing my math. They're going for $1,000 a round right now, and they're weighing 350 when they cross the border. So do the math. It don't make sense. But then you want them to turn them out for a year. So they're feeding them, not making any income on them. Yeah, it's really a tough situation all the way around, but the best we could do is
a contractor in the IPRA in North Carolina that would buy his cattle for the following year. He would buy them and do exactly that and turn them out, which really made for, those cattle never soured.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, he would buy them early. He would turn them out. They would get the weight on. They'd get the horn and the size to them. And we never had any stoppers. I mean,
Yep.
cattle run. They wouldn't outrun you because the little cattle actually, I think, run a little bit harder right out. But they just always kept a good catch on them. Now you had to get in, you know, and keep their head down because you couldn't
Better have your big boy pants on.
Oh, well, I had one steer. It was when Spunk Sasser was just a kid. He came to an IRA rodeo in South Carolina, and it was on a football field. And they had mowed so the grass wasn't very high, and it was just, you know, I run out there and caught that steer to the tree. He pushed me all the way down to the buck and shoots and circled around, and I kind of got a laugh, so I decided to hang on to him, and he went all the way back down to the bulldogging box where I was planning to let him go, and I saw, you know, a young kid named Spunk Sasser there, and I said, "Hey, would you mind taking him for a while?" Walk back in, and you know, that could happen real easy.
Oh yeah.
Down and get some pull on them.
Well, I could remember when I was a kid watching John W. Jones Jr. You know, anybody that knows steer wrestling know he was one of the greatest of, you know, his time. And I could remember him catching a steer, and this thing was huge. And he caught him right out front to B3, and he's locked over him. And this steer starts shoves him about 20 feet. And I can remember, I'm like, man, that steer's pushing him. He takes his hand off the horn and just starts waving at the crowd. And just as soon as he hits the buck and shoot, he rolls back over the inside horn and just busts him at the back end. But It was just, you know, control. It was just so impressive. I thought, man, that was pretty cool. Tried it once. It didn't work out near as well for me as it did for him. But yeah, he was pretty cool to watch. So, well, I'm obviously you've been dubbed the John Wayne with a law degree, Bud Homman. I want to get back into, I know we talked about your rodeoing and stuff, but history of Florida. And I know that's something that you have a real passion for, and talking about a book and I mean, potentially a show or a movie, which I think would be absolutely amazing. But your family back in 1830 were kind of some of the first to get down in South Florida in the cattle part, or the cattle country.
Yeah, you know, when we talk about the Seminole Indians, a lot of people don't realize prior to them coming to Florida, there were 7 Indian tribes in Florida. I believe it was 7 Indian tribes in Florida. There's really no story out there you can find as to what happened to those 7 tribes, but we do know that in the late 1700s, some of the Creek Indian tribes of South Georgia and Alabama started coming into Florida, and you know, it was Spain, you know, owned Florida at the time, and so that's how the name Seminole came to those Indians that were coming in. And shortly thereafter, you know, 1830, my ancestors sort of followed coming down in here. Originally, they were settling in what's North Florida and getting into the cattle business. And there's a famous, where I live right here, is a famous massacre of the Major Dade and his federal troops that were down what is called the Dade. Actually, it's called the Dade, the Fort King Highway. It's called Fort King was Ocala at the time. They were traveling from Fort Brooke to Fort King, and so they always talk about the massacre when the Indians wiped out the entire group of federal troops. But people say about that, I said, but you know, my family drove cattle from what's now Ocala to what's now Tampa, and Osceola never did attack them. They always got along. But you know, people don't realize the Seminoles were also big cattle people.
Right.
And they had cattle because we like to claim in Florida we're the original cowboys, because Spain came here and that's what they did in Florida before they ever did it in Texas. They set up ranches in Florida, and they had a ranch. And so when and some of the cattle wandered off because there was no fencing. So those Andalusian cattle were all over Florida, and that's what attracted so many people down. Because at that point, because of settlers from Spain coming here and setting up ranches. There were the Andalusian cattle, which we now call the cracker cow, which is the same as same breed pretty much as the Corriente, same breed as the Texas Longhorn. The people in South Alabama, they call it the Piney Woods cattle, I believe. They're all basically the Andalusian cattle that the Spanish brought in the whole Gulf Coast covered with cattle. But that's where they started, and they kept moving further south, where such as when the Ocala area, and people get tickled by 1870 had gotten too populated to run cattle on, so they went further south down what is now known as like Wauchula area, a little bit south of Tampa. Started in the cattle there, and then my great grandfather in travels working gathering cattle went south of the Caloosahatchee River into the area of Immokalee, and started buying, moved down there, started buying land, and bought the land for 3 cents an acre to $3 an acre.
Wow.
And people say now, they say, well, you can make it in the cattle business just like your great grandfather did, because like I sold calves, the average 400-pound calves, and they averaged $1,200 a head at the market. So, but he sold his for $20 a piece, but at 3 cents an acre,
Right.
buy for $20. And today in Florida, land at $30,000 an acre, $1,200 doesn't get you very far.
No, the apples to apples ratio really it doesn't make sense like it did back then. And talking when your family moved down there, now Florida was it 1830 40? I had 1835 or 45. What 45 when it became a state.
Hey.
And is that kind of when the U.S. Army and troops really started pushing on the Seminoles and kind of moving them down? Or how was that transition from the natives to having to keep getting pushed further south? And then, like you said, when your family was pushing down, they didn't bother you guys.
Well, and there was partial of people wanted the Indians completely gone, because they had basically like towns and of their own, and they had cattle businesses, and for the money grabbers that we still deal with, land grabbers, and that whole show Yellowstone is about people coming in and trying to take away a way of life of people. We're dealing with it. You deal with it in California, you deal with it in Florida, and so there was that going on. So but the Seminoles were cattle people also. They were agricultural people. They hunt and fish and raise cattle and crops and that sort of thing. So if you're going to be in the cattle business, I think you had to get along. Everybody got because the cattle were running free. So when it would come time to determine which are yours, and I've heard the stories of, they would gather up a group of cattle, and you had the good cattlemen that were very diverse group of people, that and they would do what they call mammy up. That's the word they use, and it matched the calf with the cow. If that was Luke's cow, well, then that was his calf to take out of that bunch, and his group of cowboys could take that one, and, and go to the market. And then they had big cattle drives, and there was the story that I've always heard, like my family would be heading on a cattle drive, and they'd have their cattle heading to, say, Tampa, to a port where they could be shipped out, or they went all the way to Savannah, Georgia also. They would pass by Seminole camp, and they're, you have any cattle you want to sell? And just like the Texas cattle drives were, and they would negotiate there and say, when I come through, I'll drop off the money. So there was a lot of that. that went on. So there was really, people don't realize that Florida was such a diverse state way back then.
Right.
That there was a lot of getting along, except for the federal government that was trying to promote other things.
Well, we talked about this on our call too, is Florida, if you took Florida by itself, the economic impact it'd have on the world it'd be in the top 5, I believe, as far as economic impacts, farming, ranching, agriculture, and I'm talking vegetable farms, dairy, meat production, wheat, grain, everything like that. It's really its own little, not little, I mean, Florida's a big state, but it would be able to take care of a lot of things.
Yeah, especially like when I was young, it was people can't even believe everything was cattle, oranges, farming. That's pre-Disney, and nothing against Disney, but that was before they came down.
Right.
And like I say, that we had major highways that were just rock, covered in rock, so you could go down them, and one-lane wooden bridges to go across waterways, and cattle were a lot of open range. And even like when I was in high school, I worked summers for a large cattle ranch in South Florida that wasn't my family's. And, it was a 25,000 acre. It had a fence around the ranch and a fence down the middle. So you had two pastures. Two pastures over 10,000 acres that you gathered out. I worked for another ranch down in Davie. That guy had 10,000 head of cattle back in the 70s. So there was a lot of ranchers. My great grandfather had 10,000 head of cattle. So that when he died. So there was there was major ranching went on in Florida. And as I say, as I grew up, I thought the whole world was cowboy.
Right.
But, we would go, like I said, my cousin and I would ride horses all day, and maybe one other cousin would join us. We would go around and put our horses up and go with my great grandfather, and he would tell us all the stories of the history of Florida cattle business. And I worry people don't realize all that to come here now, they don't realize that. Like my great grandfather was friends with the Claybird family of the King Ranch.
Right.
He bought Santa Gertrudis bulls from them when they first came out. That's part of the history of that group of cattle.
What are some of the 70 years of being down there growing up? I mean, the changes you have seen, and my dad and I have this conversation. He's 70. What is he, 76 now? But the changes he's seen in California, but it seems like to me the changes you've seen down there have to be just tremendous. Obviously 70 years plus. I mean, from, you even mentioned Disney coming down in there, what that did to Florida.
That, of course, Disney, he bought a large cattle ranch. But as I say, as a kid, growing up, I would go to my grandmother's, and her house was right across the road from my great grandfather's. And but we would go in there again. You went through cattle ranches, and you never knew when they started the fencing. One of the great things was that created a lane for cattlemen to drive their cattle from one pasture to another, throw them out on the road and drive them down the road on the rock roads. And nobody thought anything about it. It was like, oh, we're not going to have a very good time today because they're taking the cattle. And you say, well, that's old so-and-so going to, it's 5 miles before he gets to that next pasture. Cattle, and they're going right down the road. And at one time, I've always heard, and I can't verify that, I tried to verify it, that Florida was #1 state in the United States in calf production and cow-calf operations. And we had, we didn't have ranches like the King Ranch, 800,000 acres.
Right.
But we had a lot of ranches that were 25,000 plus up to, the Deseret Ranch in Florida at one time was close to 400,000 acres. So, people don't realize that. And like that town of Immokalee, it was a rock road through it when I was little. The houses were still, the stores and all were still the old wood frame with the boardwalk out front, like you see in the Western movies. That was, and I would say over half the men had a cowboy hat on and still had spurs on their boots as they walked down through there. That's the environment. People don't realize you were looked at funny in Florida. Didn't have a cowboy hat on back then.
Right.
And now you have to think before you wear your cowboy hat somewhere that it's not going to cause a fight with somebody down here because they think you're weird wearing a cowboy hat. So that's a major change that has happened in my lifetime. And it's kind of surprising to me. When you grow up, you take the first 10 years of my life that was, when I went to the first grade, I was all excited to be going to school in the first grade. And I put on my jeans, a pearl snap shirt, and my cowboy boots, and thought I was the coolest guy going into the class. And it was that way back then.
Right.
And just a lot of the difference. Like when I was 13, I think I was about 13. I was from my grandmother's house to what we called our lake pasture was 20 miles.
Oh, wow.
And my grandfather had a horse. We call him a Florida cracker horse, or a gated horse. The old Spanish horses down here. And so I would get up early in the morning on Saturday morning and get on that horse and saddle him and ride him all the way down to that set of cow pens by myself, and then turn around and ride all the way back because I loved riding so much. But nobody worried about me. There was no danger of me riding down that road. And then during the summer, I asked if I could take the horse and ride down there and stay. And I don't know if my family didn't care much for me or what. Down there and stay. And I went down there with a rifle in my scabbard, and they said, "What are you going to eat?" I said, "Well, I'll eat rabbits." By the way, rabbits over the open fire. But I went down there, and I will be honest, by the second night I was crying. But I stayed down there for a week, and nobody worried about me. I rode back at the end of the week, and it was a very safe place. It was a very agricultural order. Before Disney got here, and again, not blaming progress is going to come. And with Florida's climate, people are going to come here the developers now are developing all the ranches here in Sumter County where I live. There's been like 4 major cattle ranches that have sold out to developers. And, I always liked the story about, it was a distant cousin, had a big cattle ranch in her family for years. And she was a doctor. And they asked her, they said, "What do you think you're ever going to sell out?" And she said, "No, this has been in our family for generations, and we're going to continue for generations in the future." Well, like 2 years later, they interviewed her because she had sold the entire ranch, and they said, "What happened to all that?" She said, "With the price they offered for that land, I couldn't see letting a cow stand on it." So,
well, it's crazy you bring that up because Cody Johnson, obviously, to me, a great country music singer. Now he sings a song about dirt cheap and how the developers come and try to, buy his land for, high dollars. He's like, "No, my dog's buried over there. My daughter, when she comes home and wants a place to, to remember what home was about." But it seems like after you get past that generation, it gets lost. Does that make sense? It just seems like, and I don't know if it's hard work or what it is that makes the difference in that. But I feel like generational, it kind of loses its prestige, I guess.
Well, and I think that's the importance of like what you're doing is we've got to remind people, because there's nothing out there. The great thing about RFD, Cowboy Channel, and all that is it's letting people know about something, because what's happened for so long is we've been caught up with the you know, living the rich metropolitan life.
Yeah.
What I, you know, and people don't see that. It's not like when
It's
I
like
grew up.
it's like, where's your meat come from? The grocery store. Well, actually, it comes from a Florida ranch or a California ranch or a Texas ranch.
And the people, they don't know that when they grow up in that sort of progressive metropolitan life, that they think that's all that the world exists, is
Right.
that world, and they don't understand. And to me, agriculture, and especially the cattle business, is the backbone of what made America great.
100%.
Strength, that independent nature that made it great. So when you start losing that, and you move into communities where you're reliant on things other than your independence and your ability to go forward, and you start looking for, you can say, well, if you're rich, you don't need handouts. But we all know when you're up at that high corporate level, you're receiving sort of handouts that work well, and it's not that hard fight of taking that $20 you got for a calf and saying, I need to buy X amount of acres of land with this $20,
Right.
and building something for yourself. And we have started losing that, and I think it's very, very important to keep getting the message out about how important the agricultural world is, and the things that we do. And rodeo is about the independence, because when you think about when they started with the Cowboy Turtles Association, you had to be pretty much a strong, independent person to get out there and make it. And nothing against the things you've accomplished, but think about what about the Jim Shoulders and people like that. So it was it was a hard road to go to be that, but that's the strength of the country. And I grew up, and this is, I don't think that you're so much younger than me, but Saturday morning started with Roy Rogers, went to Hopalong Cassidy, went to My Friend Flick, I think was the name of it, to Sky King, which was a rancher that flew around, and that was what we watched. And then my grandfather wouldn't allow a TV. He said we didn't have a TV. He thought it was the worst thing in the world till Bonanza came along. And since he heard that, he went and bought a TV so to watch that. But that's, every night was something to do with cowboys, Western,
Right.
that sort of thing. And that's the life I grew up with. And in addition to my family. So,
Right.
I was immersed in that all the time. And I think you find, like Patrick Gosh, when he said that when he got Trigger and all that, and he brings back John Wayne, all the things that we grew up with, that's the different world we were in, and we've got to try to preserve that.
100%. I'd rodeo with a good friend of mine, Les Shepperson, his dad, Frank Shepperson, which I'm sure Frank, but Les, and this is kind of a question for you, but Les grew up in Wyoming, didn't have power. I mean, he was, I don't even know if he was in high school before they got electricity, and was able to watch TV or do anything like that. When was it for you when you were able to finally get to watch some of that stuff in the mornings?
Well, there was electricity in Florida pretty much everywhere. But I will say that my great grandfather's house, in the day when they built a house, and he had a very big house, but you didn't put the kitchen in the house because
really?
On fire, it could burn down outside and not burn down your house, because they threw wood in the stove.
Right.
And the there was a smokehouse, and that's where they hang a whole beef in there, let the smoke get on. And the had a 4-seater outhouse that people always ask me about, and I go, well, you know, if somebody else, you just have to be friendly because it's no, you don't want to keep somebody. It's not like when you just have one bathroom in the house and everybody's complaining because you're still in there. It's you know, stay in there as long as you do because people can come and go. And so that was still around. I tell people about the party lines back then, that when you pick up the phone, there would be somebody on that phone. So you didn't have a private lines to phones. And in Florida, people can't believe this. Nobody had air conditioning. That did not exist. And it wasn't because everybody was, you know, that I knew was poor. They may have been, but they certainly, you just didn't know. And the big exciting thing came along was you see a restaurant that had a sign out front say air conditioning, and it would be a window unit in there that would be cooling things down. But people would eat there just so because Florida is hot. In the summertime, and that's all changed in my, you know, in my lifetime. But I always would talk about my grandmother that you know, they wrote that book about my mother's family that called End of the Ox Trail, and she rode from Wauchula when my great grandfather bought his place down in Immokalee in an ox cart, for which they crossed the Caloosahatchee River and had to fight off outlaws to get across the river. You know, like a very much you would hear about a Western family coming down, swam across the Caloosahatchee River to go down there to live in a cabin that was dirt floor. And she would tell stories about how they would light fires, smoke out the cabin, run the mosquitoes off. Because I don't want anybody, you need to go to South Florida before you say you've been around mosquitoes. Because there's mosquitoes so big, they have to get permission to land at the airport out there.
You could hear them coming in from a ways away.
Oh, that was the scariest thing when I went down that week, was when it started to get dark, you could hear the mosquitoes start to come in.
Oh,
and
wow.
Loud humming sound. But she went down there and they would smoke out, and then because it was so hot, they would sprinkle their bed with water and to cool it down. And then they had to get under mosquito net. But before they got under mosquito net, they would put fish oil all over. And I called her Granny. I said, well, Granny, does fish oil keep the mosquitoes away? She said, not so good, but it keeps everybody else away. So that's the life she grew up with. And she would tell about the first time she saw a car come into town. And you know, and the fact that in Florida at that time, there were still wolves, panthers, and, you know, we still have panthers and bears, and how her mother had to be careful because they worried if, you know, a kid walked off, that could be the end. And of course, no matter what anybody tells you, big gators will eat a human being. And everybody says, well, they don't like the flavor. I said, well, I don't want to be the one that upsets their stomach. But they got calves. Those big gators will get calves. And there was one down on our ranch that actually would kill cows.
Holy cow.
Yeah. That
and just they'd stick their head in and go get a drink of water, and they'd come up out of the water, latch onto their nose, and drag them in, I'd imagine, huh?
Well, what they do is they can swing their tail. And when they swing their tail, actually a big gator like that will break the leg of a cow.
Oh, wow.
Down, then they grab and drag them into the water and drown them. And that, and we had a lot of all that. Panthers, bears, when I was growing up. Panthers, bears, big gators. All that.
You know, we talk about history and reminding people, and even my generation, I'm 43, but even the younger generation, like my kids, you know, California used to have grizzly bears in it, and a lot of people don't even realize that. I didn't realize that Florida had wolves down there. And just these are things that I think that really need to get put out there for the history of each state, but more so the history of our country and how we came and where we're going and where we need to head back to.
Well, and the number of animals that have, like the red wolf in Florida, we think it's extinct in Florida. It's no longer in Florida at all, though every once in a while there's a believed sighting. I was in my back pasture. A coyote came out, and he was so big, and he was staring at me, and I was like, that might be a red wolf. He's actually a little more aggressive than most coyotes act. But supposedly they're not here anymore, and that's upsetting because there are reports. John Bartram, it was an English explorer that explored Florida, and I'm trying to think. I want to say early 1700s, maybe, and reported that there were buffalo, elk, in Florida at the time. Now I don't know what he was seeing, but that's what he reported as seeing. So that's all gone. There's all kinds of locations that have changed in Florida because of the movement of the water. Like my great grandfather would tell, one time they had a drought in South Florida, but it was raining up in North and Central Florida, and they were holding up some cattle somewhere, and a flow of water came flowing down, and it was flowing from north. Well, we've lost that, and when we think of the environment, we're losing it in Florida. I know other states are too, but Florida depends very much on rainfall to survive, and all of it's being taken and filtered straight out into the ocean to make sure people that buy swampland stay dry.
So yeah, well, exactly, and even California, they had it set up, 50, 70, 100 years ago to where we're going to build dams every so often to catch rainwater because we know we need water to keep up with the growing economy, growing environment. And anyway, our government, which we can go all down that rabbit hole another time, because I think you and I are on the same wavelength of how ignorant they are, but they take that money and put it elsewhere instead of putting it where it was supposed to go. But that's one thing I wanted to ask you. And I know this is a song that John Anderson sang, Seminole Wind, talking about the Everglades and the swamps going dry and all that. And that's exactly what you're talking about, where it is now and where it used to be.
That's funny. Before that song came out, I've been married for 46 years, but when my wife and I were first together, and we would go on down on the ranch, and there's a lot of woods down in the ranch, a lot of wooded area. It's it's known as one of the great deer hunting areas. So I would be walking through there, and I would look up in the trees and start looking around, and she goes, what are you doing? And I would say, I'm sitting here thinking that Osceola saw the same scene, because there's
right.
and experienced this, and what the Seminoles that originally started coming in here, that what you can understand why they wanted to fight and not be defeated, because of the beauty of the life they lived, and how that's all been taken away, and that, and again, that goes back to what Yellowstone is
Right.
showing, as it was taken from the Indians, who had everything kind of wonderful, but the cattle people didn't destroy that. They kind of kept that, and now the developers are coming in, and it's the story that I think that's what made that series so popular, is because that's the story of what us that deal in lifestyle are dealing with, and watching it completely go away and not being able to experience what it was like when Osceola was riding free through. And I may not have prefaced it right. Osceola was the war chief he wasn't the chief; he was the war chief.
Right. Well, and even for me growing up out in California, going down to San Juan Capistrano, south of LA, or even going north into San Francisco, Livermore, Hayward, the Bay area was some of the most beautiful and most productive farm and cattle land in the state of California. And 70 years ago, you get on top of a hill, yeah, you'd see San Francisco over here, and then maybe San Jose and Oakland. But now it's just one. It's from north to south. It's just one big, huge city where it used to be some of the very best, cattle farmland in the world, and similar to down there. Now the developers came in, and granted, I understand with population booms and growth, you need to have that expansion, but it's really sad that some of the best farmland and ranch land is what was taken, obviously, because it was, I guess, easily accessible, and it is sad, but I do agree with you. Yellowstone has, the Yellowstone effect brought in the Western culture back into society, back into even going to Europe. My wife and I went a couple years ago to London, and I wore my cowboy hat everywhere. And I had so many people they were kind of staring, didn't know how to take me, but obviously had seen the show and watched the series, and just thought it was kind of neat to see a cowboy hat in London, England.
I would imagine so. That you would get the same now. It's funny. Orlando, where Disney is at, which is just north of Kissimmee, which was the center of cattle in Florida at one time. But I remember my dad calling Orlando Cowtown back when I was a kid. When he would go up there, and it was not unusual, like I say, in Orlando, in the downtown section, to see people wearing cowboy hats. They were, that's what they did.
Right.
Did they have a cowboy hat everywhere he went? It didn't matter where he went.
Right. Did they have, like Orlando, did they have a stockyards there where that was kind of the meeting point for ranches to get their cattle shipped everywhere?
I'm sure they did. I was trying to recall. I know Kissimmee, which is right there, has a big livestock market. And then there's another thing, is the number of livestock markets in Florida. There's so many of them, and they're starting to disappear. And the numbers of cattle, are going down. And I was talking to a man that runs the livestock market here. That they're concerned because the price got high, and some of the people are having a hard time. They're bailing right now.
Right.
They got developers knocking on the door saying, that land you paid $500 an acre for is now $30,000 an acre, and we're willing to do it right now today. And you're thinking, and now my cows are going to bring more than I ever dreamed they could make. So I'm going to unload and get out. But what's happened is people are starting to wonder, where is the supply going to come?
Yeah, where's it going to come from? Exactly. That's a great question.
Test tube or something, but
gosh, I seen that on the news where they did that synthetic beef. I can't even fathom it.
Well, I can't even imagine. That's another thing that people. I grew up eating a lot of what's called grass-fed, because my grandmother would get. They would just go ahead and butcher. That's what they did. The smokehouse, and so I remember my wife the first time, because she didn't grow up with that kind of lifestyle. My grandmother invited us to have steak at her house, and it was right out of the pasture. It is kind of funny that she had a house called Cindy, and she goes as she's putting the steaks out for everybody. She said, "Bud, and you'll know this is that big brindle yearling that Cindy had." And so my wife said, "What is she talking about?" She said, "Just like a family friend we're going to eat." And so anyhow, she started to eat it, because the grass-fed beef tastes entirely different than beef that's been fed, corn-fed beef.
Right.
And so I grew up with that. So that's a different taste. And now that they're going big with it, I have a friend that works for a ranch, and they do their own butchering of grass-fed beef. And he was talking about how great it is, and people are loving it, and all that sort of thing. And I said, well, does it taste different than it used to? And he started laughing. He said, no, but people are loving it right now, which I didn't never mind the taste. I love beef. As far as I'm concerned, that's my meal.
Right.
And in fact, when my doctor was talking to me about health things that I needed to do, and I said, if you're going to tell me to cut out beef, the doctor went, no, I'll never tell you.
You can stop right there.
Yeah, that, I'm going to enjoy some of my last days.
Yeah. Well, but I have truly appreciated getting to visit with you. I'm looking forward to, I know you mentioned that maybe a book or maybe a series coming out with you. And if there's anything we could do here on Luke Branquinho Show to help push that, please let us know, because history of the United States, history of the great state of Florida, I think this is stuff that needs to get put out there. And I feel like you're the guy that can get it out there.
Yeah, this guy that's putting this book out is that ranch I worked on when I was in high school, Cow Creek Ranch. And, it's part of the history of Florida, that ranch. And so I'm looking forward to that. I want to thank you so much. From the first time I met you, I was thinking about that. I really liked you, and thought you were, and I think you've done so great for the sport of steer wrestling. You sort of brought it into a different realm, and so I've always appreciated that. So I thank you so much for having me on.
Well, I appreciate it, Bud, and we'll catch up again some other time.
All righty. Sounds great, Luke. Have a great day.
Sir. You too.
Rodeo trivia question.
Where is the Pro Rodeo Hall of Fame and Museum of the American Cowboy located? The Pro Rodeo Hall of Fame is located in Colorado Springs. It also preserves the heritage of pro rodeos and its legendary contestants. Hey, you want to see more in-depth details on the Luke Branquinho Show? Make sure you like and subscribe. This month on the Luke Branquinho Show, we are doing special segments, and the segment is called Cheers to That with our friends at Yeti. You guys send in some drinks, and I'm going to make them. Ellie Elrod, she sent us in a gin and Sprite, so I'm going to use my Yeti stackable right here. I'm going to throw a little ice in there just to let it kind of chill down. Then I'm going to take my Yeti shaker. Thing's pretty handy to make things cold. Little Beefeater gin. I always go to feel. I don't ever really use a shot glass. I mean, feel, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it how I want to do it. Pretty stubborn like that. But then I'm going to chill this gin down with my Yeti shaker. Little pour. I'm going to do a little Sprite. Just a splash. Cheers to that, and cheers to you, Ellie.